past the peeling, but they want less talent and they want more titties. They want more silicone, but my chromosomes fortified in Astrodome. I ain't about to play with you niggas. Astro project just to get away from you niggas. Conformist types, I just go astray on you niggas. Came back cause I know my sons gon' need a sitter divinely led. Too far ahead to say I got next. Went through a wrinkle in time and now these hoes press say less. I'm a pro to a con. I be shitting on the presence like I'm using the John Goddess. Almighty, enlightened, understood the assignment. I'm in African attire, walking through the barbed wire, muddy waters in the fire. Emerges black messiah, the universe has conspired. My mothership is required, a task I've inherited. Carry these hoes like a surrogate for the rebirth, just so I could change the narrative. Look, ain't no manufacturing, ain't no scarcity of me's. I'm the one the Neo bring, bitch. And my mic is up a time, run circles round these bombs. I was built for marathons, quit. Why would I? When I got us on the shit talking bullseye.
What they was doing, Piso created the Jesus character off of him trying to control the Jews, and then by the time the Nicene Council came in 325 AD, what his name is, Constantine used that blueprint that Flavius had to try to still use that to control the Jews and other people in their surrounding areas. But originally there was no Christianity. That was them people trying to follow a blueprint to control the Jews in the territories that Rome had took over, which was, you know, basically Israel, Judea, and all these other little places that the Jews were not originally from. They stopped off of there because they was kicked out of Kemet by Archemos, who started the war, and then Thutmose the first, all the way up to the second and the third. I forgot the other female that was his great-great-granddaughter, had pushed the Jews out, and that was what they call in the Exodus. But it was an expulsion.
I thought it was what's the name's my grandmother that pushed the Jews out. I know what you're talking about. Is what's the name's grandmother?
But that was a second.
I mean, that pushed the what's the name out? What the fuck was her name? She was a great warrior. Like, she was revered. Like, she was no joke. Like,
well, you got two different X's they talk about. One when the Hyksos and the Jews was in Kemet, and then you have some later with Akhenaten, because you had another, matter of fact, Matheno was talking about it was some lepers that they got kicked out, but they was mixing them together from what Matheno was doing. He was mixing a little bit what happened to the Hyksos and a little bit to those lepers, and, you know, Akhenaten, you know, got kicked out and by his father. It's a whole, I'm gonna do a video on that pretty soon, and how that whole thing with the story of Moses was totally ridiculous.
We're running on a little bit into later dynasties here, but I'm just sort of explaining that, you know, they've deliberately missed off the names of these people to confuse the text, so you don't know what they're exactly talking about. It's like Josephus when he's talking about the Edessans, going on into much later, into the 1st century, and Josephus says that the army that came down to help King Aretas of Petra was some fugitives from Syria. And you think, oh, thank you, Josephus. Why don't you tell us who these people are? Some fugitives from Syria. And then you read the Syriac historians, and they say that this was the army of the Edessan king, Abgarus V. Now you get the name, but you see how Josephus has deliberately deleted the name, so you don't know exactly what's going on.
I'd like to ask you, just, I know we don't have a lot of time, but why is it that there's so much of that information that is occult and arcane? Why is it deliberately hidden? Why do you think?
Because they wanted to sell a different story. The story of the Israelites, excuse me. The story of the Israelites as the most powerful people in the world, being kicked out of Egypt did not resonate with its people. In order to keep people together, you need to sell a story of oppression. So we are the poor oppressed people. It was those evil Egyptians that were against us. And we have to stick together. Excuse me.
So I don't want to, I know you're in the middle of your statement, but I just want to ask you, are we talking about, I call it the cult of Moses. So when you say they had to stick together, are we talking about the exodus of the Hyksos and the lepers together? Were they trying to unite them?
Well, they're actually in two different eras, but they've spun the same story out of both of them. So the Hyksos was 1580 BC, quite a long time ago. And then the 80,000 lepers and maimed priests was not until about 1320 BC. So we're talking at least sort of 300 years between the two. But they're both trying to sell the same story. In order to keep these people together as a community, it's much easier to do so if you sell a story of oppression, because that keeps people together. You've got to stay together as a group, as a community, because you're being oppressed by these evil Egyptians. And the only way we're going to survive is to keep together and protect ourselves against these evil Egyptians. That's the story they wanted to sell to keep their people together. To say that we actually were the most powerful people in the world, but we still lost this civil war, is not quite such an easy sell to the people. And I think the priests understood that. It's been copied ad infinitum by many groups throughout history, even in recent history, by Islam, even by Christianity. You look at early Christianity, and it's all about the martyrs who were killed by those evil Romans. It's a story of oppression again. Stick together because we're being oppressed by the Romans. They did exactly the same, and they altered their history to match that. I wouldn't say it's a complete fantasy of oppression, because some of them were being oppressed. The Jewish Christians, the Nazarene, were being oppressed, but the standard Christians of St. Paul, were not being oppressed. But it suited their agenda to have this concept and this idea of oppression to keep the people together, and that is how they crafted the Old Testament. And so we end up with these two Exodus events, according to Manetho, so according to history, these two Exodus events, which have been amalgamated into one within the biblical text. And so you can't really see the difference between the two in the Torah story. But really, originally, there were two Exodus events, 300 years apart, more. And they were quite different in a way. But I mean, the same people, because the Hyksos Israelites had come back into Egypt with the Joseph story. So the Joseph story is quite clear that they came back into Egypt with him and his brothers. And Joseph, as we know, and we've talked about, went on to become the prime minister of Egypt. And Moses likewise became very important. And that was quite clearly, according to Manetho, that was the story of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, who were banished to the east bank of the Nile at Amarna in central Egypt, to the stone quarries on the east bank of the Nile to build their new city of Amarna. And that was circa 1320 odd BC.
Excuse
And
me. So
yeah,
Akhenaten and Nefertiti were banished. They didn't choose to do that.
a bit of both. You've got to imagine that Akhenaten is this new hippie type guru with a different idea of religion, completely different to the rest of Egyptian religion and Egyptian tradition, of course. His father was still alive, so he was not pharaoh at the time, although he assumed the title of pharaoh. But his father was still alive and ruling in the rest of Egypt. So it's half of one and half of the other, really. He was banished because he was not very popular, quite obviously. So he took his followers and went to somewhere that was completely barren, unused. So this was a new plain on the east bank of the Nile, which had never been settled before. And he built his new city there. And it's quite obvious he did that as a bit of a power play, because it's right in the center of Egypt, saying, right, I'm at the very center of Egypt. But I can't go to Thebes, I can't go to Tanis, I can't go to the major centers, north and south. I'm going to park myself right in the middle of Egypt, and I'm going to declare myself as pharaoh, even though he wasn't, because his father was still reigning. So they had this co-regency, and I think it was probably a bit of an uneasy co-regency, because Akhenaten was so radical in his new beliefs and his new religious system. And I've said this before, but if anyone wants to know exactly what happened at this time, because it's sometimes difficult to grasp what was going on, although those 2,000, 3,300 years ago, it's a long time ago. But exactly the same happened just a decade or a couple of decades ago. This is the Ranjish, I think, community who settled in Oregon. And there's a film, you've probably seen it on Netflix, Wild Wild Country. That is Akhenaten. The story is exactly the same, of this popular guru who led his people out into the middle of nowhere in the center of Oregon somewhere to create this new city from nothing, and all of their trials and tribulations and their fractious arguments with the locals out there, and how they became very successful. But then they became a police state. I mean, it became very, very oppressive towards the end of it. They tried to poison the local town of local people. And then it all sort of broke down into infighting, and they all had to go out on an exodus because it failed. That is exactly what happened to Akhenaten. That's the Akhenaten story of this charismatic new leader who led his people out into the quarries on the east bank of the Nile, as Manetho calls it, to build his new city, goading his people on to ever greater feats, because he wanted the best city in the whole of Egypt, working them to their deaths. And we know that from the mass burials at Amarna, where all of the workers were piled up in mass graves, and they all had suffered very, very hard work and very poor nutrition as well. So we know that his workers, although they were his supporters, I doubt if they were slaves as such, his supporters were so enamored with this new religion that they were working themselves to death on his behalf. And so when we come back to the biblical story, and it's saying about Moses and his people, the Israelites in Egypt, Pharaoh is saying to the people, you are idle, you are idle. You must make bricks whether you have straw or not. The only thing that the Bible doesn't tell you about is what is the name of the Pharaoh. Because that would give the game away. Because the name of the Pharaoh was Akhenaten. So it was their own leader, it was their own pharaoh that was goading them on to ever greater feats to build his new city, which he was trying to build from nothing on the east bank of the Nile. And so it wasn't some evil pharaoh, nothing to do with these people, a completely different society and place. It was their own leader. It was their own pharaoh goading his people on to ever greater feats. You are idle, you must make mud bricks whether you've got straw or no straw. And of course, this new town was all made of mud bricks because they couldn't quarry enough stone.
Ridiculous. I did a couple videos on, if you go back to Noon Science and Astrotheology, it's like 4, 5, 6 videos I did on that. And that stuff is out there. The true story, what happened. Thutmose the first was Moses. And he was not a prophet. He was a pharaoh, Phoenician pharaoh, who was part of the invaders of Kemet after the 6th dynasty and kicked the Jews out after a long war. That was drawn out, but that's another story. But this guy here believes that Jesus' real name is Yahshua. No, it's not. And I proved all that with those other videos, the historical Jesus 1 through 7, which is on my YouTube right now. Historically, all these dudes in the conscious community, the Hotep and all this other stuff they've been saying, and the meta-netta, none of them knew that. Some of them is in doubt about it, and again, because they're so hell-bent on trying to prove that the Bible came from Kemet, and it didn't because there was no book. You're talking about scrolls and all that, so you have to be very specific and stop saying that, because the books, they didn't have a book.
What? Wait, you saying what? You said gotta stop saying what?
They gotta stop saying the Bible came from Kemet, because they didn't have books back then. You had scrolls that was written in between 600 BC all the way down to the beginning of the book of Malachi. So you had writings that was going on, but we talking about scrolls and parchments. And there was other stuff that we as African people wrote, and the Phoenicians, who were called Canaanites, black Canaanites, who was the invaders of later day Kemet, in upper Kemet, and they was ruling these different things, upper sometimes and lower, whatever. And those writings the Jews possessed, and the Romans, because they was ruling all that stuff, they had access to Alexandria and all those things they took. And that's what Piso and them was using in his family to create the Jesus story within the New Testament, which was a lot of it did happen, but they obscured it. They broke Caesarion up into 2, 3 Jesuses in the New Testament. I got video footage on all of that, explaining how this whole thing was done. Paul was Piso. It was no Saint Paul. It was all based upon Flavius. Josephus is real name. Josephus Matthias Mattiyahu. That's his middle name, and that's how the book of Matthew got its name, because that was his middle name. Jesus' so-called father's name was Joseph. That was Josephus's name. He was playing characters in the story too, even though he wrote about what happened to the real Jesus. But that was, like I told you, 70-some years ahead before this whole stuff happened. So he was writing him and his family in and out of the books. You see what I'm saying? A lot of this stuff, people just not aware of it. That's what's wrong with our people now. Then you got these people here who are possessed and are brought into the community to mix and match all of the information, and it sounds crazy. So you done been around long enough, you done heard at least 20 different versions of the Jesus story. Now he done came in and saying something that nobody else was saying in the so-called community. Now Jesus, Mary's mother or grandmother had a virgin birth. Where you getting this from? And he doesn't cite sources either. He in certain cases, like when he do these little clips, he don't cite no sources. He just say these things because, just like Polite and the rest of these different individuals, they want to think that they want you, the viewer, to think that they just they just coming off the dome or they just so intelligent. No, this guy here is a Johnny come lately. He had his start in 2014 trying to rise up the ranks, and he just is an updated version of Polite. That's what
it's starting to sound like.
Right, and Dr. York, he's really in the image and likeness of Dr. York, and he's trying to take over the conscious community. Just like Sarnetta had the Sarnetta Awards, this dude here now finna have some awards. Well, he gonna be giving out awards in the bigger, better, splendor, and all that, because he's trying to take over the whole thing. And then we only got here because we have people like Sarnetta and them set up all this destruction and distraction and foolery and niggotry that they'd allow somebody to study the game and try to come in. So he came in from a different angle. You see what I'm saying? So he's playing things, him and 19 Keys them, and they're following a black print that I've seen.
A black print. I like that.
You see? But we can let it go. Go ahead.
Come out of anybody's mouth except for me, forbidden knowledge. Look it up. Make sure you get on your for text.
That's what I'm saying.
On purpose for God to be put into.
He said things. See, now he's playing these books, the Apocrypha. Now he's throwing it up here. But then he had a nerve to say, nobody else said this but me.
I did hear that part.
So go run it back and watch what he said. He gonna say nobody else told y'all this but me.
That's come out of anybody's mouth. Dewar was also a product of genetic manipulation through something called vitro fertilization, as well as his grandmother, who was also a virgin birth, which they never tell you about that in Bible study, that Jesus' grandmother, right, Yeshua's grandmother was a virgin birth. You never hear about it, never talk to you about that in Bible study. Not once have you ever heard that come out of anybody's mouth, except for me, forbidden knowledge. Look it up. Make sure you get all your Apocrypha text, the text that was by accident on purpose forgotten to be put into the Bible by the Council of Nicaea.
He definitely did say that.
See,
he definitely
and that's all this is. You see what I'm saying? So he's trying. What he's doing, just like Pharaoh and all the Johnny come latelys, they're trying to paint themselves into a timeline that already passed.
Yep. And then he gave himself. The thing about it is, they all criminals, and then try to get himself a clean image. Why don't you just tell the truth about your history from the beginning?
Right, and they coming in the heyday of Sarnetta and them, rising to fame was with Polite.
Mm-hmm.
After all that stuff happened with Polite, everything started declining. They missed it. That's why that's how you call her Johnny come lately. You missed the heyday. So what you want to do is play cleanup. You doing the same stuff with like you said, if your name appears between Hotep and Hustler and Scammer, it's a problem.
There's a problem.
He ain't nothing different than everybody else trying to come in. Him and 19 Keys wrestling them, got these so-called quick get rich quick schemes, and we can do this. Before it was something else with Polite and them, paperwork. Now here they go with crypto. Y'all not the first dude to do crypto. It's plenty of people
restoration, microwaves, and
all of those stuff. And but he got on my radar because the lies he's telling historically and spiritually. And I know that black people has an addiction to religion and anything that sounds like it could be true. And then their fault is they're lazy because they don't do no research.
They don't want to do the research.
And then these dudes can say these things. So he told you that Jesus was brought in here by intro fertilization. Number one, that's a modern word. So y'all ain't there's no way y'all got no evidence of that. 2, he believes aliens artificially inseminated Mary.
Wow.
All this stuff Dr. York was saying.
That sounds like it because didn't Dr. York believe in like gay aliens or something like that?
All that stuff. But this is the stuff that they perpetuate. They believe that an alien.
It's one thing to believe in aliens, but gay aliens, that just make it over the top.
I got all the information and footage on that. This is what York was teaching. You know, this what all of these people having a fixation with aliens.
Wait, wait, are you saying gay aliens are real? Like, there are gay aliens?
If the way they was trying to put it was that these ETs were hermaphrodite and hermaphrodite.
Okay.
They had these. They will say they try to use. They'll say, well, it's not how humans view it as being gay, but the acts they commit would be considered homosexual, lesbian. Gay is just a slang term for happy, but you can't say no. But then when you describe, okay, well, how do these hermaphrodite aliens cohabitate? And then once you start listening to what they say, then you be like, oh, okay, you ain't telling me nothing different. So they lost the crowd with that, and even Sarnetta still was pushing that. He still was allowing them to come on his platform and push this foolishness. But now this dude, the 19 Keys, instead of going to Sarnetta, because they know they're gonna get ate up over there on Sarnetta platform because they know how to ask certain questions. So what they do, they go on the Brother Rich route, and they go to Brother Rich platform, and they mixing and matching. And
I saw him on Ancient Aliens. He started off on Ancient Aliens.
Yeah, because he's trying to come in on a different route. But all you gotta do is just, if you listen and watch, you can tell where he's coming from. And he just, again, he's slick, but he's not that intelligent when it comes to trying to fool people who done been in this particular scenario watching the games. And that's what it's the same moves. The same spirit forces just jumping from one body to the next. That's how I view him. He not saying nothing new. They keep talking about money, and when he was talking about when he was threatening JT and this other guy from Africa who was exposing him, talking about he's selling some kind of water that can make your age, reverse your age. All this is the same stuff that Ali Muhammad, Minister Inky, all these different people was coming out with all these products that they say do this and that. This is the same stuff. And I remember when Sarnetta and Inky fell out because Sarnetta had which I got the audio, where he took some Inky products and he claimed it almost killed him. And he was cussing Inky out on the live, telling him, you need to come up and take responsibility because you gave me some health products that almost killed me. And Sarnetta was 38 hot behind that.
Don't ever.
You're not ready, babe. Yo, Inky, I'm gonna send you a link. Come on in.
Come on in, Inky.
Yeah, I want to come in. Told you that, boy. Inky ain't stupid, man. Y'all talking all this shit about, Inky know this and he can come in. But why is he not coming in there? Come on, man. You know if that Polite was here, Polite would have jumped into this shit quick. No, yeah. Why is this? Yeah, right. Yes, I hear you now. 5 million. Look at this. Hold on. Be quiet, everybody. There's nobody running. I was telling you to bring your fake ass in here all night. So who the hell is running, Inky? What he did was he Inky, stop playing games. Stop playing games. Tell us who you healed. Who you healed, Inky? Who you healed, brother? Tell us who you healed. Who you ever healed, Inky? Cut it out. Stop playing games. Bring your ass in here where the people can challenge you and ask you questions. Because that's all you're gonna do is come in, talk shit, and then run so nobody can ask your ass no questions. Come in here and face the people like a man. Face the people like a man. Stop reading books acting like you smart. Come in here. Stop playing.
Sunnetter. He'll do great. He'll do great to his audience when he's speaking and kicking all that stuff.
Yeah, I can tell you reading the book.
Yeah, but if he has some people who are scientifically literate in his space, they get away with that type of stuff.
Yeah, I can call it whatever the fuck I want to call it. I'm tired of the bullshit. That's all I'm saying. I'm tired of the bullshit. Because I almost fucking died. I almost died. And niggas coming up in here trying to make me look like I was the fucking victim, like I did something wrong. That's what Inky did. Inky made it look like I was wrong. I wasn't wrong. I never said that you're gonna take some herbs and just automatically get better. I said I took the goddamn products and almost goddamn died. That's what I said. Wow. That's what the hell I said. I never said I took the products to go ahead and get healed automatically. No. It's an art to listening, fools. Come on, I'm not this fake ass shit. And you can tell when a nigga is bullshitting because I can respect some of Divine's prospect information because he's not trying to sell shit all the time. He ain't just trying to sell it. He really believes in what he's teaching. You know? So I'm tired of the fake shit, man. I'm tired of it. I'm just tired of it. Bring your ass in here, show the people that you're real, and be questioned like everybody else. That's it. Be questioned like everybody else. And if you can stand up to the questioning, then I fucking respect it all again. And until then, stop it. All that shit sounds smart. You some dumb niggas that's listening to all them big words and that bullshit. Show me one person who you have healed. Just bring one. That's all. I'm not saying thousands of them. Just bring one. And if you can't do that, get the fuck out of here with that bullshit. You're just reading medical books and thinking that shit sounds slick and you sound smart. I'm tired of that. I'm biased, motherfucker. I'm biased. You damn right I'm biased. On the bullshit, on the foolery, on the trickery. You damn right I'm biased. You dumb niggas are doofus. You go for any goddamn thing.